You're saying why didn't you ship a single SIM device with a microSD slot?
Yeah.
So very good question, and the answer is actually a couple of different things, but it's very simple. So we are for high performance devices, we are fundamentally against an SD card slot.
Okay.
And there's a couple of reasons. The first reason actually has to do with the design. That unless we compromised one of the SIM card slots, which we do not want to do, but even if we did that, and I'll come back to that in a second, we would end up having to make a device with a smaller battery, or it would be a bit thicker, or a bit wider, or a bit taller, or something like that. Plus, we would have to have two trays, right? One for SIM card, one for SD, and it just starts to compromise the design and the ergonomics of the device. Right? In a nutshell, it wouldn't be as thin and as compact, or it would have a noticeably smaller battery compared to what we have today. So that's one thing. The second thing is actually related to performance and reliability. SD cards are incredibly prone to failure and malfunctioning of various different sorts. One of the many reasons is because a lot of SD cards in the market are fake. They're really poor quality. You think you're buying like a Kingston or a SanDisk, but you're actually not. And they're extremely poor quality. They're slow. They sometimes just stop working, and it gives people a huge number of issues. Apps crashing all the time, users losing data, a lot of basically complaints and customer frustration. Like if your phone all of a sudden is not working well, it's going to be a while before you finally accept that maybe the reason why it's not performing is because you put in an SD card, right? You're going to blame the phone, you're going to blame the manufacturer, you're going to shout and scream and try to get it fixed in so many different ways until you finally say, actually, let me just take the SD card out and see what happens. Right? So it ends up being a huge source of headaches for consumers. So it is a trend. SD cards will disappear.
Is this also a concern of Google? So they are making device like Nexus without a micro SD card slot?
Yeah, it's exactly the same.
All right.
If you talk to you're the first person to ask the question this way. I'm very glad you did. If you talk to some of the senior engineers on Android, they've been there forever. If these guys could I almost feel tempted to mention their names. If these guys could like throw SD cards out of existence, they would, right? Because it compromises performance.
It's a headache for engineers?
Well, it's not a headache for engineers per se. Well, I mean, there are some issues with like data transfers and so on and so forth. But more important, it just compromises performance. You end up with a slower device. You have unreliable data stores.
All right.
You know that Android, for example, doesn't support putting the applications in the SD card.
Yeah.
Right? And there's a very good reason for that. It's because what happens if you pull out the SD slot, the SD card, right? Like,
Okay.
What happens to that app? What is the user going to expect? You can't really explain that to a person in a logical way, so you just don't support it. So SD slots, SD cards are just going to disappear. Okay. And they are starting to.
Yeah.
Even though it's seen as an advantage for Android, because obviously iOS is supported, you think
Bigger memory, that's what you go for.
Internal memory.
Bigger internal memory. That's our solution to the problem. And you should basically not expect SD card slots in any of our flagships. Of course, when you're shipping an 8 gigabyte onboard flash device, I mean, you don't have a choice. Right? You have to give the user some way to increase memory.
maybe we'll get a 128 gigabyte version of the M4i.
Or 256.
The world's first. Think about it.
250.